White hotel staff turned away Big Shaq's daughter like she was forgettable, but the name they dismissed is now written on every wall they used to guard. That check-in denial. It signed their exit. She didn't argue. She returned, as the owner. This isn't just payback. It's legacy reclaiming its seat. Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. The heat that day wasn't cruel, but it lingered. The kind that settled into your skin like memory. The sun stretched lazily over the Carolina coast, casting its golden hue across the sharp white facade of the Ashworth Grand, one of the most expensive, exclusive hotels in the region. It stood tall like it had something to prove, every marble column and glass panel polished within an inch of perfection. Guests strolled in and out, their luggage wheeled by well-trained staff, their conversations laced with entitlement. Inside, cold citrus water shimmered in glass pitchers, and the air conditioning whispered money. Brielle O'Neill pulled up in a sleek charcoal SUV. No entourage, no flashy entrance, just her, a crisp linen blouse, a vintage leather duffel, and a name that had moved mountains behind the scenes. But here, it seemed, meant very little. Her curls were tied back, minimal makeup, just sun-kissed skin and tired eyes that hadn't rested in months. The trip wasn't about status, it was about healing, and this hotel? It was supposed to be the place where she'd finally exhale. As she stepped out, the valet, a lean young man in a fitted blazer, froze for a beat too long. Not overt, not rude, just paused, like he had to reconcile what he was seeing with what he expected. She offered a nod, and handed him the keys. "Room under Brielle O'Neill," she said, already reaching into her bag for confirmation if needed. Inside, the lobby was cooled to perfection, and bathed in that sterile luxury look, muted tones, curated art, a chandelier too delicate to touch. Behind the counter stood 3 staff members, 2 men and a woman, all white, all sharply dressed, all suddenly still. The woman, blonde with a hotel-issued nameplate that read Sloan, offered a tight smile. "I'm sorry, did you say O'Neill?" Her voice was professional, but the tone underneath was something else entirely, like a name being cross-checked against a mental guest list it didn't belong on. "Yes," Brielle replied, resting both hands on the counter. "I have a confirmed reservation. Early check-in." Sloan typed something quickly. The man beside her, Graham, leaned over slightly to glance at the screen, then at Brielle. Then he whispered something under his breath, just soft enough for plausible deniability. The third staffer, a young guy named Brent, started fidgeting with the room keys, but avoided her gaze entirely. After a few long seconds, Sloan looked up again, eyes shifting left and right. "I'm really sorry, Miss O'Neill. It looks like there was a glitch in the system. We're actually overbooked due to a private corporate event. I'm afraid we can't honor the reservation." Brielle blinked. "Overbooked? My reservation was made 2 weeks ago through your general manager directly. Fully paid. You should." The hesitation was brief but visible. "Yes, it appears the system double confirmed a few guests, and we had to consolidate. I can help you find something nearby if you'd like." "No, thank you," Brielle said, the corners of her mouth tightening. Not in anger, not yet, just in recognition. She'd seen this performance before. Smiles weaponized as shields. Politeness used to escort dignity out the back door. She reached into her phone, pulled up the email trail with the general manager, and gently laid the screen on the counter. "This is from Everett Blanche. Does he not work here anymore?" The staff faltered. Sloane's fingers twitched near the keyboard. Graham shifted his weight. Brent adjusted the tray of keycards nervously, knocking one to the floor. Still, the line was held. "I'll speak with Everett myself," Sloane said, not meeting her eyes. "But unfortunately there's nothing available tonight. You understand, I'm sure." Of course. She always had to understand. Brielle lifted her phone slowly, nodded once, and turned without another word. Outside, the valet was waiting, still holding her keys, expression unreadable. He was the only one who looked unsure, like he knew what had just happened, but he said nothing. She took the keys from him silently, slid into the car and closed the door. The AC hummed to life, but the chill didn't reach her. She sat for a long moment, staring at the towering hotel sign, her grip tightening around the steering wheel, not in frustration, but in focus. Then quietly she made a call. "Hey," she said, when the line picked up. Her voice was calm, but something in it had shifted. "It happened." On the other end, There was a pause. Then a familiar gravel-deep voice responded. "You want me to handle it?" She looked back toward the sliding glass doors, where the staff now laughed among themselves, like nothing had passed through them but time and a minor inconvenience. "No," Brielle said, eyes narrowing just slightly. "I've got it." As she pulled away from the valet circle, a luxury SUV passed her, its passenger window lowering just enough for a woman inside to glance out. An older white guest, her expression passive, eyes flicking toward Brielle like a storefront she wasn't going to enter. This was how it was. Still, always. Even when you carried a last name that had filled arenas, funded scholarships, fed entire communities. Even when you didn't come to be recognized, just respected. And sometimes not even that. Half a mile down the road, Brielle pulled into a quiet overlook near the water. She stepped out, phone still in hand, the ocean breeze catching her hair as she leaned on the hood. She didn't call her father again. She didn't cry. She simply scrolled through her contacts and found the name at the top of a chain she hadn't used in years. Harper Creed. Real estate attorney. Closers division. Quiet. Precise. She hit dial. "Harper, it's Brielle. Let's finish the Ashworth deal. I'm ready to sign." From the other end came only 3 words. "Understood. I'll prepare." She stood by the water long after that, the sky dimming, the wind sharpening. Her hand stayed resting on the car. Her shoulders didn't slump. Her jaw didn't soften. What they mistook for meekness was actually measurement. They hadn't just refused her a room. They'd opened a door they wouldn't be able to close again. And this time she wasn't walking through it alone. There was a time Brielle O'Neill thought the world could be softened with kindness, that if she carried herself with enough grace, enough calm, people would see her as she was, not just as a tall, brown-skinned girl with a famous father, but as a person with her own life. She'd learned early, though, that the world wasn't always designed to see light in people like her, and that lesson didn't come from books or classrooms. It came from long talks with her father on dusky porches, and slow drives through cities that looked one way on the brochures and another up close. Back then she was just a girl in sneakers and oversized t-shirts, always trying to match her dad's stride. Shaq, or just Dad when the cameras weren't around, was a walking fortress. Big, yes, but it wasn't the size that filled rooms. It was the weight of presence, the kind that made people shift when he entered, and whisper when he walked past. Some called it charisma, others called it celebrity, but Brielle came to understand it as something else entirely: earned power. He never taught her to chase it, just how to carry it quietly. On her 9th birthday, Shaq took her to a downtown diner in Baton Rouge. Not the 5-star kind. This one had sticky floors and formica tables, but it was where his mother, Lucille, used to take him when times were hard, and pride was all they could afford. The waitress didn't smile when they walked in, didn't offer menus until someone from another table recognized him. Even then, the look in her eyes wasn't excitement. It was wariness, like she couldn't decide if the room belonged to her anymore. Brielle had whispered, "Why's she mad we're here?" Shaq hadn't answered right away, just took a long sip of coffee. Then he said, "Sometimes people get real angry when they realize you've been walking through doors they locked a long time ago." He taught her to hold her chin up, not to look superior, but to never appear small. Lucille, too, had her way of teaching. No raised voices, no lectures, just steady hands and a sharper mind than most professors. Brielle would meet later. Lucille once handed her a newspaper headline that used the phrase "Shaq's girl," and said, "You're not anybody's girl, baby. You're your own name. Don't let the world think otherwise." That line etched itself deep, and it followed Brielle into adulthood, through private schools where she was always the exception, through Ivy League interviews where they smiled too hard when she spoke, through boardroom meetings where men addressed her assistant instead of her. She never needed to be told she belonged. She just learned to stop asking for permission. Now, standing outside the Ashworth Grand, that same girl, grown now, refined and sharper at the edges, watched the valet jog toward another guest's car, eyes flicking toward her as he passed. He knew she could see it in the way his brow pinched, the way his steps slowed slightly, like he wanted to speak but something in him was still caught between job and justice. He said nothing. She didn't blame him. Through the glass doors she could see Sloan and Graham laughing near the desk, heads bowed in the kind of laughter people reserve for jokes they know would land badly if heard too widely. Brent stood nearby, too quiet, eyes darting between them and the lobby entrance, guilt tucked beneath his pressed collar. They didn't know what they'd just done. Or maybe they did. Maybe the cruelty wasn't in ignorance, but in the confidence that they could get away with it. That she would leave, shake it off, and become just another silent story that never got retold. But what they failed to see was that Brielle had never been raised to walk away quietly. What she carried wasn't just her father's name, it was Lucille's silence, shaped like steel. It was the resilience of communities who knew how to build futures from ruins. It was the echo of every door closed in her family's face, that was later bought out from under the people who closed it. Back in the car, she sat still for a while, letting the air move through her lungs slowly. This wasn't new, but it still burned. Not because they'd refused her a room, but because the way they'd done it felt rehearsed, practiced. And that kind of injustice, the quiet kind, was always the most dangerous. It didn't leave bruises, just erosion, of dignity, of belief. Her phone vibrated once. A text from her father. Need me to roll through? She stared at it for a moment. The man had always had her back. But this time, it wasn't about having backup. It was about drawing a line, and standing on it alone. She texted back, "No, I got this." She started the engine. The valet looked up, startled as the car pulled forward. She gave him a nod through the window. It was small, but it said, "I saw you see me." And maybe one day that would be enough for him to speak. Halfway down the coastal road, her mind drifted to a story her grandmother once told. About the time she was asked to leave a department store for trying on shoes. She hadn't raised a scene. She'd walked out with her head high, and 20 years later, when she had the means, she bought that building and turned it into a shelter for single mothers. Not to prove a point, just to rewrite one. Brielle had thought of that story often. Now, it didn't feel distant anymore. It felt like a map. The sun dipped lower over the ocean, the light turning from gold to rose. In the rearview mirror, the Ashworth Grand still stood tall in the distance, untouched, unaware. But the next time she walked through its doors, the smile she'd bring wouldn't be for approval. It would be for the deed. And the laugh, if it came at all, wouldn't be cruel. It would be quiet and final. Shaq leaned back in the leather chair of the 27th floor suite, watching the city below drown in a pale blue dusk. The air was silent but charged, like the moments before a lightning strike. His phone buzzed once. He didn't flinch. He picked it up, pressed the call, and waited. "Harper." The voice on the other end responded briskly, a tone laced with familiarity and restraint. "All papers are in motion, but the current owner's dragging their feet on disclosure." Shaq closed his eyes for a second, listening not to her words but to the timing. He could tell when people were stalling, when they were hiding sweat under sarcasm. "Make sure the deal closes before the gala." There was no emphasis, no urgency, just a statement of fact, a silent boundary. Harper didn't argue. She never did, when he sounded like that. Downstairs, the grand lobby of Hotel Ardent buzzed with its usual late evening rhythm. Guests in tailored suits, perfumes trailing behind, stepped in and out of the gilded elevator shafts. Employees moved precisely, some practiced grace, some on anxious edge. None of them knew. None of them had any clue that in less than a week, their employer wouldn't be the fated dynasty that had clung to Ardent since the 1980s. The real owners had vanished into generational shadows. This deal wasn't just a transaction, it was an erasure, and a rewriting. In the control room near the hotel basement, Brielle scanned the surveillance feeds, not as an operator, but as someone deeply familiar with how people lied with their bodies. Her fingers hovered over the Zoom dial when she spotted Taryn, the day manager, slipping out of the side hallway usually used by contractors. "Interesting." She noted the time, logged the camera, and picked up her second phone. A quick text. "Shaq. He's poking around. Again." Back upstairs, Shaq saw the message, but his gaze was elsewhere. He was reading an old file Harper had sent weeks ago. Taryn's employment history. Normal, on the surface, but patterns never lied. Short stints, sudden resignations, and a habit of being around companies right before they flipped hands. Someone else knew about the acquisition. Someone who had a reason to stall it. Shaq made no move yet. He wasn't in the business of rushing truths. Power never does. It waits. It watches. Then it moves exactly once. At the right moment. He turned back to the window. The city had darkened. Lights came on like stars learning to shine. 2 floors below, in the private lounge of the upper executive wing, Brielle sat with Daryl, the hotel's head of operations. They both pretended to meet for monthly compliance checks for weeks now. But Brielle didn't waste time with formalities anymore. "Who's been asking questions about ownership?" she asked, cutting through the chessboard tone. Daryl always tried to bring.
Daryl didn't flinch.
Aaron, maybe 2 other supervisors.
He's been floating rumors mostly about layoffs, buyouts, change of flags.
And you said nothing? I didn't confirm anything. Just told him to focus on the gala. Brielle's eyes narrowed. Not in anger. In calculation. The gala's not the distraction. It's the test, she said quietly. Daryl frowned, slightly confused. We're not just buying a hotel, she added. We're measuring who's a threat to the future. That night we'll decide who stays and who fades out with the old name. Her words weren't cruel. They were clear, measured, practiced, like she'd rehearsed the moment where truth gets softly slipped into conversation. 3 days until the gala. Shaq walked through the ballroom alone at dawn. The chandeliers above were still dimmed, the floor crew just starting to wheel in staging crates. The air in this place felt thick, not with dust, with secrets. His phone rang again. "Harper, good news," she said. The last signature hit. "You're now the primary silent equity holder. No delays. Transfer set for 11:59 the night of the gala." Shaq didn't smile. He simply replied, "Perfect." She hesitated before hanging up. "And the other party?" "I'll handle it." Click. He put the phone away, then stepped up onto the empty stage. The platform felt strangely warm underfoot. Even in the cold of morning, he looked out over the room. Tables yet to be set, curtains still unraised. This is where it would all culminate. Not with a speech, not with a toast, just with a silent shift of ownership. A name changing hands, without a sound. The night of the gala arrived. Gold cloths dressed the tables. Strings of soft white lights draped across the ceiling. Waitstaff glided through with champagne trays and laughter that felt slightly too high-pitched. Brielle wore black, unadorned, serious. Her hair tied back, eyes scanning, always measuring. She wasn't there to celebrate. Taryn was. He moved through the room like a shark in shallow water. Slow, confident, dangerous in the wrong space. He made conversation with the event coordinator. Whispered a few words into the ear of an investor from out of town. Too comfortable. Shaq arrived late. No announcement. No spectacle. He walked in quietly, nodded at no one, and took a glass of still water. He watched Taryn. Saw the way his hands kept reaching into his jacket. Maybe for notes. Maybe for something more metaphorical. Leverage. Brielle approached quietly. "He's got something, but I don't know what yet." Shaq nodded, then turned slightly, catching Taryn's eye for the briefest second. Taryn froze. It wasn't fear that stopped him. It was recognition. He suddenly understood who had been behind the closed doors, who had made the quiet calls, who had turned silence into a strategy. Shaq stepped forward, just slightly. No confrontation, no scene, just a presence. A signal. Taryn turned, walked toward the exit. No argument, no fight. The air cleared. Brielle looked at Shaq. "That's it?" He shrugged. He understood the room. At 11:59 p.m., a single message was delivered to the board. Transfer confirmed. New ownership in effect. No speeches, no champagne, no final bows. Only a shift, like a new tide arriving on a silent coast. The ardent name would remain, but the meaning beneath it had changed. Power had moved, and it hadn't made a sound. The Ashworth Grand had never looked this immaculate. Every marble surface had been polished to a reflection, and even the chandeliers had been cleaned twice, though no one could ever tell. The night wasn't just for charity. It was for ceremony, for legacy, for illusion. Gold-rimmed place cards and nameplates glittered under the candlelight, and the orchestral quartet's notes swam across the air like they belonged there. As if sound itself had been trained for high society. Guests had begun to gather in tailored suits and velvet gowns, unaware that the very ground beneath them was shifting. Behind the scenes, tension grew like a held breath. Preston Hartwell, the hotel's general manager, stood in the service corridor, adjusting his cuffs for the 3rd time. He wasn't nervous, not in the traditional sense. He just knew too little for comfort, and he wasn't a man who functioned well in fog. He'd been promised stability after the acquisition, but now, no new leadership had stepped forward, no introductions, just polite corporate emails and vague HR notices. And tonight someone had made a deliberate choice. A very specific word was printed on the gilded welcome signage. "Welcome to the Ashworth Grand, Not Hotel Ardent. Not even Ardent by Ashworth. The name had been quietly changed. He sipped his drink harder than intended, and scanned the ballroom, looking for anyone out of place. That's when she walked in. Brielle, hair swept up, gown black, and gliding, eyes sharper than the stemware around her. She moved with deliberate slowness, not for drama, but for dominance, the kind of woman whose silence was louder than applause. Heads turned, but the discomfort was subtler than gossip. The staff began whispering first. Whispers, that she looked familiar, that maybe she'd been here before. But when? In what capacity? A guest? A consultant? Only Preston recognized her outright. His chest tightened as his memory snapped to the surveillance reports from weeks ago. Brielle in slacks and a staff badge, eyes on the cameras. She'd been inside, undercover? Not exactly. Something else. Something above. He forced a smile and stepped forward, intercepting her before the curiosity turned into a scene.
Miss.
She turned. Calm, poised, disarming. Evening, Preston. That stopped him cold. First name. No hesitation. No guessing. You look stunning, he offered, faltering. And you look worried. He blinked, tried to recover. We weren't informed of any distinguished arrivals tonight. I wasn't aware you weren't supposed to be. He stiffened. May I ask who invited you? I invited myself. It was the kind of response that held no malice, just fact, and it cut sharper than a threat. She smiled gently and brushed past him, her presence as seamless as it was disruptive. From the corner, the event coordinator raised an eyebrow. She'd been given a last-minute addition to the program. Someone who would be announced just before the closing remarks. No name, just a title, new ownership introduction. She'd asked Preston about it earlier. He'd brushed it off. Now he watched Brielle move through the crowd, and something in him knew. The gala host, a clean-cut man with a voice trained for ribbon cuttings, approached the stage. If I may ask for your attention, he began, and the quartet gently faded to silence. Thank you all for supporting this evening's charitable cause. But before we close, there is one more announcement to make. Preston's throat dried. Tonight is not just a celebration of giving. It's a moment of transition. It's our honor to introduce you to the new owner of the Ashworth Grand. There was a pause, a beat too long. Then she stepped forward. Brielle. Not with fanfare. Not with pageantry. Just calm, controlled steps. The audience murmured. Eyebrows rose. Guests tilted their heads. Staff members froze in recognition. Preston's grip on his glass slipped just slightly. She took the microphone gently, like it might break under force. Good evening, she began. Some of you know me. Most of you don't. But I've known this place far longer than you think. Her voice was clear, balanced, not theatrical, but unforgettable. I've walked these halls, watched the staff, listened to the rooms. I came not as a guest but as a witness. This hotel doesn't just need management. It needs remembering. It needs redefinition. She let that hang in the air, letting the weight of those words replace volume. I'm not here to renovate the chandeliers or rebrand the cocktail menu. I'm here to ensure the Ashworth Grand becomes what it was always meant to be. A legacy earned, not inherited. A slow, respectful applause began. Hesitant at first, then building. Preston didn't clap. He couldn't move. He finally saw it. The move beneath the moves. The hand that had shaped the deal from the shadows. Not Shaq. Not Harper. Her. Brielle had been the architect all along. When the applause subsided, she left the stage without lingering. No photos. No autographs. Just one nod to the staff before slipping past them, leaving a trail of unfinished thoughts in her wake. Later in the post-gala quiet, Shaq waited for her in the unlit garden behind the ballroom. She joined him silently, the click of her heels muffled by soft gravel. You didn't flinch, he said. I don't need to, she replied. Preston? He'll adjust. Or he won't. Either way, the building stands. They stood there, unspeaking for a while, the silence between them not empty, but earned. The power shift hadn't been announced with force. It had arrived in silk, spoken in calm, and left its mark in the expressions of those too stunned to resist. The Ashworth Grand had changed hands, and no one had seen it coming. The ballroom had thinned. The charity gala's shine still lingered in the clinking glassware, and stray laughter echoing near the foyer. But something quieter had taken hold of the room now. An alert hush. Brielle stood near the edge of the stage, not on it this time, as if reclaiming the space more intimately. The mic was handed to her without a word, no official cue. She didn't ask for attention. She didn't need to. The air did that for her. Shaq remained at the back of the room, arms folded, eyes steady, unreadable. He wasn't there to support her with words. He didn't have to. He was there to listen, and to make sure no one looked away too soon. Brielle took the mic with both hands, not to grip it tighter but to anchor herself. Her gown caught the amber lights above, but her voice when it came softened the edges of the room into something far less decorative. "I want to thank everyone again for attending tonight," she began gently. "You've made generous contributions, shown public support, and smiled at each other with warmth. That is admirable. That is easy." She paused just enough to hold them without pushing. "But since I'm new here, and you've just met me through your applause, I'd like to tell you something that I think matters more than introductions." No one moved. "When I was 23, she said, I walked into a hotel not far from this one. I was wearing black slacks, a blue blouse, and carrying a portfolio for an interview I had scheduled 3 weeks in advance. I smiled at the receptionist. She didn't smile back. Her voice didn't shift. It didn't bend toward pain or drama. It stayed clear, just enough truth, just enough light. She asked me if I was here to drop off menus. I didn't understand the question. She pointed toward the service entrance and said, "Deliveries go through there." Someone near the front coughed. A short involuntary sound. Another person cleared their throat. I told her my name, twice. I told her I had an interview with the regional coordinator. She looked at me like I'd lied to her. Then she asked if I was sure. Riel looked toward no one, in particular, just slightly upward, as though the ceiling might have answers. "When I was 30, I checked into another hotel for a leadership conference. I'd already paid. I'd booked in advance. I stood in line behind a man in khakis, who received his keys with a smile. When I stepped up, the receptionist didn't look at my ID. She looked at me, then tilted her head and said, 'Are you with housekeeping?' More shifting in the room now. Silverware being laid down slowly. Some eyes finding the floor. I said no. She asked again. I said no. She asked, 'Are you sure?' Shaq tilted his head slightly. He'd heard this story before, not in words but in silence. In the way Brielle had once looked at a hotel hallway like it still held ghosts. The question wasn't really a question, Brielle continued. It was a reminder of who she thought I could be, and who she was certain I wasn't. Someone whispered near the back, but no one turned. Everyone was still listening, or pretending to. "This happens quietly," Brielle said. "No slurs, no shouting, just a tone, a glance, a pause before the word myth." She stepped a little forward now, not to approach them, but to be closer to herself. "And it doesn't just happen in one hotel, or one lobby, or on one afternoon. It happens wherever someone's trained to smile before they speak, trained to be polite before being honest, trained to believe that people who look like me must first justify their presence." She stopped, not dramatically, just long enough to let breath settle. "When I came into this building a few weeks ago, I wore no name tag, no business card. I walked the halls, I asked questions, and many of you were kind, sincere, professional. But not all." Eyes rose, slowly. "I was offered directions to the kitchen twice. I was warned about wandering guests once, and one employee asked if I'd lost my event pass." She smiled faintly, without humor. "I hadn't lost anything. I was exactly where I was meant to be." Shaq's gaze didn't shift. His arms remained folded, but his jaw had tightened, imperceptibly. Brielle looked directly into the space now, not confronting anyone, not naming names, just letting the truth hang there, unshielded. "There is a kind of racism that doesn't raise its voice," she said. "It doesn't curse. It doesn't shout. It asks questions like, 'Are you sure?' It says things like, 'We weren't expecting you.' It assumes things about where you should stand, where you should enter, and what you should never own." She looked down briefly, then up again. "I am not here to punish anyone. I am here to name something that should no longer go unnamed, because shame doesn't need to be shouted into submission. It fades when it's exposed. It weakens in light." The silence was heavy now, the kind that pressed down into collars and made people unsure of their hands. She held the mic a moment longer, then offered a final line. "This hotel will not be run by fear, or silence, or the comfort of unexamined habits. It will be run by truth, even the quiet kind. She handed off the mic. There was no applause. Not right away. Not because she hadn't earned it, but because they didn't know if they should. It wasn't that kind of speech. Brielle didn't wait for approval. She turned and left the stage, walking past the front tables with the same calm certainty that had first brought her through those doors weeks ago. Some staff members stood frozen. A few looked after her with dawning realization. One receptionist sat with her head lowered, finally remembering the moment she'd mistaken Brielle for a temp worker. No one spoke to Shaq as he followed her out, but their eyes followed him. He paused once at the door, turned slightly, and scanned the room. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. The words had already landed, and their echo would live longer than the applause ever could. The hotel lobby always looked grander, at night, a glow resting gently over gold trim and marble veins, as if it had earned its stillness. Staff moved more slowly past midnight, whispers replacing walkie-talkies, and the front desk hummed with the faint rhythm of keystrokes and yawns. On this particular night, the staff didn't know what was coming. They didn't know the camera mounted at the corner near reception, the one everyone forgot existed because it never blinked, had recorded something weeks ago that was no longer just evidence, but a spark waiting for air. Earlier that morning, Harper Creed had made one short call. Just 4 words. It goes live tonight. And that was all. No headlines. No promotional tags. No expose-style framing. Just a quiet upload from an unbranded source, titled A Quiet Moment at the Ashworth Grand. The video was only 48 seconds long. It showed a young black woman, hair tied neatly, holding a slim portfolio, walking through the front doors of the hotel. Her stride was steady, measured. She approached the reception desk, smiled, and spoke. No sound played in the video, only a soft piano instrumental looping in the background. The receptionist looked up. Her smile flickered, then vanished. Her lips moved in a stiff line. Brielle's expression shifted slightly, but noticeably. She spoke again, pointed to something in her folder. The receptionist tilted her head, leaned slightly to the side, and gestured toward the service hallway. The footage paused briefly. Text appeared on the screen in white letters. This is what polite exclusion looks like. Then the video resumed. Brielle's mouth pressed into a line. She hesitated, then slowly turned away, her shoulders square, her walk unchanged. It ended there. No confrontation. No outrage. Just dignity standing quietly in the face of dismissal. The post was timestamped and captioned with only one sentence. There are moments we forget are being watched. And the internet did not scroll past. In the first 3 hours, it spread across small community platforms. By morning, it had hit national accounts, civil rights organizations, equity think tanks, and even celebrities who rarely waded into hotel politics. Not because of the hotel's name, not because of who she was, but because everyone had seen it, or lived it, in some version of their own life. 1,000 comment threads didn't scream. They shared. A quiet fury wrapped in calm tones. People spoke of job interviews missed, names misspelled deliberately, moments they had to rehearse how not to sound threatening while correcting someone. No one mentioned the receptionist by name. No one needed to. That wasn't the point. The point was this happens. It still happens. And this time, it had been caught with no sound. Just truth. Inside the Ashworth Grand, the ripple came fast. By midday, Preston Hartwell had 3 missed calls from PR consultants, 2 urgent emails from the parent company's board, and 1 unscheduled meeting request from Harper Creed's office, titled Only Containment Strategy. But the problem wasn't scandal. It was clarity. You couldn't refute it. You couldn't say it was taken out of context. There was no context to twist. In the staff break room, 3 employees sat silently watching the footage loop on someone's phone. One of them, Jasmine, from the events team, hadn't said a word since seeing it. She had been the one who first spotted Brielle that day. She hadn't said anything cruel. She hadn't said anything at all. That was the problem. Brielle had walked past her, and she'd stayed silent. And silence was now the loudest sound in the room. Later that evening, in her office on the 30th floor, Brielle sat with her screen dimmed, reading through the public responses, not out of vanity, out of responsibility. She had never planned for this part to go viral. But when her team had suggested releasing the footage, she'd agreed. Not to punish, not to point fingers, but to prove a point. You don't need rage to set fire to injustice. Sometimes you just need the right angle. Shaq entered without knocking. He placed a cup of black coffee on her desk and sat in the chair across from her. "It's everywhere," he said. "I know." No names were mentioned. They didn't need to be. He studied her for a moment, then added, "They're calling it the most graceful indictment they've ever seen." She let out a quiet breath. Not quite a sigh, more like release. "It's not about grace, it's about record," she said. "People forget what they said, how they said it. Cameras don't." Outside, in the corridors, the atmosphere had changed. Staff walked a little straighter. Greetings were more deliberate, less automatic. A kind of tension had replaced comfort. Not fear, but awareness. In a private email circulated internally, Brielle had written, "This is not a call for apologies. This is a call for responsibility. If you saw yourself in that video, even faintly, ask why. Ask how it got that far. And ask what happens next." She signed it simply. Preston read that email 5 times. Each time the words felt heavier. He hadn't been in the video. He hadn't even been on shift that day. But he knew what had lived quietly beneath his management style. The preference for neatness, sameness, for predictable hires. He didn't call Brielle. He didn't draft a public statement. He walked down the hallway to the HR office and asked to revise the onboarding protocol. Not out of damage control, but out of discomfort, the productive kind. By week's end, national outlets began running pieces not on Brielle herself, but on what they called the Ashworth clip. Think pieces circulated. Academic circles analyzed the body language. One editorial simply titled their column, "The Violence of Redirection." Through it all, Brielle didn't speak publicly. No interviews. No podium rebuttals. She'd said what she needed to say. Not with commentary, but with memory. With footage. With silence. In a world addicted to noise, it had been the quietest moment of the year, and it had started something. 3 days after the surveillance clip turned national, the Ashworth Grand carried a silence that no string quartet or marble finish could conceal. It wasn't shame. Not exactly. It was exposure. And exposure doesn't always shame. Sometimes it just lingers in the air, tightening around conversations that once passed unchallenged. Brielle sat in the boardroom on the 29th floor, its walls still lined with gold-framed photographs of the hotel's grand openings, banquets and ribbon cuttings from decades past. But today, the screens in front of her showed something far less curated. Harper Creed, across the table, tapped the spacebar on her laptop. The first document opened. A guest complaint form from 2018, filed by a visiting professor from Atlanta, who had written in clear, measured language about being followed by security staff for hovering too long in the lobby, while waiting for his wife to return from the restroom. Brielle scrolled. The complaint had been marked handled internally. No follow-up. No record of interview. Next, a woman from Toronto refused access to the rooftop bar, despite holding a VIP wristband. The staff member on duty said she didn't look like one of the gala guests. No disciplinary action noted. Harper clicked through efficiently, her face unreadable but her fingers rigid with tension. Then came the email thread. The one they hadn't expected to find. It began casually. A brief message from a shift manager in 2020, asking if front desk teams could be extra selective during high-profile weekends. A second message followed. "We don't need another incident like last Memorial Day. Let's keep our lobby sharp. Screen for riffraff before they make it to the elevators. You know what I mean." There was a reply. Someone had inserted a winking emoji. The thread had been buried under dozens of promotional folders, mislabeled as Client Experience Initiative. The name meant nothing. The content, however, said everything. Brielle leaned back slowly, the air tightening in her throat. "This is not a culture problem," she said softly. "It's a confidence problem." They were confident no one would ever read this. Harper nodded once. "I'll flag the thread and prepare the internal packet." No names went to the press. That was Brielle's one condition. This wasn't a witch hunt. It wasn't about blood. It was about soil, what had been growing underneath. Quietly, for years. Still internally, the fire had started. The HR director, a man named Linford, sharp, in suits but slow in action, had requested a private meeting after catching wind of the document review. He arrived in Brielle's office with a printed copy of the hotel's ethics statement. She didn't stand to greet him. He offered an opening line that sounded prepared. "We believe these concerns, though troubling, are not reflective of the institution as a whole." "Stop," Brielle said, cutting in gently but without room for continuation. You don't have to defend the whole house, just the broken windows. He hesitated. Some of these emails were old. Context is important. Humor can be misinterpreted. Humor isn't the problem. Targeting is. Her voice didn't rise. It never did. But something in it made Linford lower his eyes to the page in his hand. Files will be reopened. Quietly, she added. I don't want spectacle. I want accountability. This isn't about one bad joke or one bad night. It's about patterns. And patterns are policy in disguise.
Linford nodded. Slower this time. By the next morning, 3 mid-level supervisors had resigned. 2 front desk managers were reassigned pending further review. None of it was public, but everyone inside the building felt it.
It was in the way the kitchen staff greeted security, more deliberately. The way the concierge desk paused before brushing off a complaint. The way silence was no longer an option. Shaq, meanwhile, said nothing. He moved through the hallways, like usual, measured, unreadable, calm. But his presence was strategic. Where he lingered, meetings shortened. Where he paused, conversations changed course. He never raised a voice. He never gave instructions twice. But every step he took now had weight. Because people had begun to understand something crucial. He wasn't just the co-owner. He was the echo. Every decision Brielle made. Every shift Harper documented. Every face that blinked too long after an uncomfortable question. Shaq saw it, and didn't forget. A week later, a staff-wide memo went out. Simple, unstyled, no branding. To all departments. As part of our transition, we are re-evaluating prior conduct records, not to punish the past, but to clarify the future. Some of you may be asked to attend one-on-one interviews. Some of you may already know why. This is not a search for guilt. It is a commitment to truth. If you believe something went unreported or ignored, you will be given a place to speak. No retaliation, no filters, just clarity. The Ashworth Office of Integrity. The word integrity had never appeared in any internal department title before. It wasn't just symbolic. It was a fracture in tradition. The following morning, Brielle stood beside Harper in the newly converted meeting room, now marked listening sessions. It was a space where employees, former and current, could speak freely. Anonymous options were available. The floor was thick carpet. The chairs were wide. There was no desk between speaker and listener. One by one they came. A former bellhop who remembered how the night manager used to escort the wrong types out before guests arrived. A concierge who once overheard a radio call, labeling a group of black conference attendees as not the usual clientele. A young receptionist who once got pulled aside for smiling too hard at a guest who wasn't our typical donor demographic. They didn't cry. They didn't accuse. They just said what had been unsaid. And slowly the files began to fill, not with retaliation, but restoration. Brielle kept her face neutral through it all. Not because she felt nothing, but because this wasn't about her pain. It was about theirs. When the sessions ended that day, she stepped into the hallway to find Shaq already waiting. They came, she said. They would, he replied. You opened the door. They weren't just stories, Shaq. They were policies in disguise. Patterns wearing protocol like perfume. He looked at her with something close to admiration, but heavier. We dismantle it now, he said. Quietly, but completely. And they would. Not through firings broadcast for show. Not through headlines screaming names. But through paper trails finally walked backward. Policies rewritten with sharper eyes, and patterns that would no longer go unchallenged. Truth didn't burn hot. It burned slow. But it left nothing unchanged. The morning press release arrived with the delicacy of a glass bell. Printed in the soft gray font of corporate remorse, it began the way all such documents do. Formally, distantly, and late. We deeply regret any misunderstanding that may have occurred at the Ashworth Grand, and remain committed to fostering a welcoming environment for all guests and staff. The word misunderstanding was the problem. It hovered like a fog over the truth. It reduced what had happened, and what had been recorded, exposed and confirmed, to a matter of crossed wires. The staff received it first through internal email. Then the hotel's official channels posted it publicly. Preston Hartwell signed the bottom in that stiff, pre-approved serif that stripped even his apology of personality. For a moment it looked like an attempt at closure, until Brielle responded. She didn't wait. She didn't call a press conference or summon a team. She simply recorded a 2-minute video in the very place it began. The lobby. Same marble floor. Same front desk. Same wide lobby entrance with its gold-accented columns. The camera angle was soft, the lighting warm. It wasn't dramatized. It didn't need to be. She stood in the center of the frame, wearing a charcoal blouse, hair pulled back, no branding in sight, just presence. Her voice was steady. "I've read the statement from Ashworth Management," she said, eyes calm, trained on the lens. "They regret what they call a misunderstanding." A pause. "I'd like to clarify something. This was not a misunderstanding. It was a mirror." Behind her, the soft blur of the lobby filled the frame, elegant, still, and freshly aware of its own scrutiny. A misunderstanding is when someone forgets your name, misreads a time, or hears the wrong room number. What happened to me, and what has happened to many others, was recognition, not confusion. She didn't blink. Someone looked at me and decided who I couldn't be. They didn't ask for my name. They asked for my purpose, and when I gave it, they questioned it again. Shaq watched from the executive floor, leaning against the side of the hallway wall, earbuds in, unmoving. Brielle continued. "There is a kind of bias so quiet, so well-mannered, that it doesn't sound like hate. It sounds like protocol. It sounds like, just checking. Like, are you sure you're in the right place?" Her tone never shifted toward anger. It lived in clarity. And when you call that bias a misunderstanding, you give it permission to repeat itself. You suggest the problem was confusion, not conviction. You erase accountability by hiding it in language designed to soothe, rather than repair. The video cut briefly, not to a different location, but to the original security footage. Not raw but reframed. Brielle in her business attire from that original day, approaching the desk, smiling, waiting, holding her portfolio. The receptionist's hesitation. The gesture to the side entrance. Her voice layered softly over the footage. "This isn't rage. This isn't performance. This is a record." Cut back to her in the lobby. Real time. We live in a world where institutions are more fluent in PR than in people, where apologies are designed for optics, not transformation. But here's what I know. Apologies don't fix culture. Honesty does. Clarity does. She ended with one last sentence. "So I won't accept this apology. Not because I'm angry, but because I'm awake." She stepped out of the frame, and the post was live. The reaction wasn't explosive. It was personal. The comments beneath it didn't erupt. They unfolded. Paragraphs. Stories. Admissions. People shared their own moments of dismissal. The small humiliations delivered with smiles. It wasn't just a video now. It was testimony. The next morning, the front page of a major editorial ran a simple headline above a screenshot of Brielle's video. It read, "This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a mirror." Inside the Ashworth Grand, Preston sat in his office, the corners of his apology memo now creased and smeared with coffee rings. He'd meant to stay ahead of the story. He didn't realize the story had already moved on without him. Harper entered without knocking. She handed him a printout. "The board saw the video," she said quietly. "They want a meeting, not to review your apology, but to review you." He didn't answer. There was nothing to say. The apology had backfired, not because it was wrong, but because it was hollow. In the staff cafeteria, screens played the video on loop, muted. No one dared mock it. No one laughed. People watched it in pieces, glancing up between bites, silently measuring their own behavior. Some saw themselves in Brielle. Others saw themselves in the receptionist. That was the mirror. Later that evening, Brielle walked past the concierge desk, nodding slightly to the new trainee, who greeted her without hesitation. The nod was returned. No confusion. No misplacement. Just recognition. Shaq joined her at the elevator, his jacket slung over his shoulder. "You think it'll stick?" he asked. "Change doesn't start when people believe you. It starts when they see themselves and flinch." He nodded slowly. "Preston's meeting with the board tomorrow." "I know." "Want him gone?" "No," she said. "I want him to understand why the apology failed." Shaq half smiled. "You're patient." "No," she replied, stepping into the elevator. "I'm precise." The doors closed gently behind her, and somewhere in the basement, another team member reopened the staff conduct manual, quietly rewriting the future. Shaq stepped through the grand revolving door of the Ashworth Grand, just past 9 hour. The lobby, polished to its daily perfection, caught the morning light through its eastern windows, casting thin gold lines across the marble floor. He was in a charcoal gray suit, no tie, no pin, no flash, but heads turned. The receptionist, not the same one from that day, but trained by those who once were, straightened in her seat. Her greeting caught in her throat, half formed behind the smile she was taught to wear. She didn't speak. Neither did he. Security, concierge, and management staff all turned slightly as he passed. Some adjusted their stances. One man from facilities, dusting the base of a potted plant, stood upright, with unprompted deference. Shaq didn't nod, didn't pause. He moved like time itself, unbothered by attention, but immune to resistance. He walked past the same front desk where Brielle had once been redirected, where a woman had looked at her and assumed her purpose, and denied her space with a professional calm. That woman no longer worked here. But her absence wasn't what lingered. What lingered was the memory she had left behind. Shaq passed the elevator. He didn't need it. He took the wide stairs to the second floor, the level reserved for high-tier conferences, exclusive client meetings, and until recently, executive sessions conducted behind closed doors, labeled authorized personnel only. That label had changed. The new door, now left slightly ajar, bore a black-etched brass sign with a clean, unpretentious serif.
The O'Neill Foundation, hospitality with honor.
He stepped inside. The room wasn't grand. It wasn't meant to be. It had been redesigned. Quietly. Purposefully. Exposed brick. Warm oak bookshelves. Neutral earth tones. No skyline view. No giant desk. Just a central table. Room for collaboration. Brielle stood at the far end, speaking quietly to two interns who were preparing packets for an upcoming regional training. She turned as Shaq entered, offering him the same knowing glance she had given him years ago when they first began drafting the framework for the foundation. "Board meeting in an hour," she said. He nodded. "Press isn't coming?" he asked. "No need. They've already said everything worth hearing. We're just doing the work now." She passed him a folder, updated partnership proposals from independent hotel training programs. "You saw the new signage?" she added. "I did. Too poetic?" "No. It's earned." She smiled, but only for a second, then turned back to the table, sliding a chair back for him. Outside the office, beyond the glass, behind the corners, staff still whispered. It wasn't fear, it wasn't even gossip, it was adjustment. A quiet recalibration of posture. The ones who had once stood taller around certain guests, who had decided when politeness doubled as control, now second-guessed their instincts. Not because of punishment, but because the structure that had once enabled that behavior was gone. Replaced. Redesigned. It had started the moment Brielle's name went up on the private ledger. Not as a CEO, not as a figurehead, but as founder. With Shaq listed beside her, not as a financier, but as executor of transition. And that transition was not symbolic. The HR policies had already shifted, rewritten with collaboration from civil ethics consultants and former hospitality workers who knew firsthand the coded language that used to pass for procedure. Training modules no longer focused on service etiquette. They focused on awareness, response, and impact. New hires weren't just tested on scheduling software. They were interviewed for cultural responsiveness and real-world comprehension. In-house mediators had replaced external neutral third parties. There were no terminations announced. No one paraded out, but people left, some voluntarily, some quietly reassigned. And in every corner of the hotel, a phrase began to circulate among staff, spoken in private, passed in whispers. "The ground's not the same anymore." Shaq sat at the table, opening the folder Brielle had handed him. He didn't speak for a while. Then, without looking up, he said, "Do you think they understand yet?" Brielle leaned against the chair opposite him, hands folded. "Some do. Some are still grieving what they thought this place stood for. The rest are just watching." He nodded. "Watching matters. Watching becomes learning." A knock on the side door. Harper stepped in, tablet in hand, expression unreadable but efficient. "The First National Syndicate has asked for comment," she said. "They want to do a profile on the foundation." Shaq raised an eyebrow. "We're not ready for that. They said they'd run it without us." Brielle smiled faintly. "Let them. The story's not ours anymore. It belongs to whoever saw themselves in it." Harper nodded and stepped out as silently as she had entered. Back in the lobby, the morning rush of check-ins had begun. Uniformed bell staff moved carefully, smiles a bit tighter, watching the elevators more closely, but not out of scrutiny, out of attentiveness. A woman approached the front desk, mid-30s, jeans and blazer, natural curls pinned high. She asked for a tour of the new foundation suite, having read about the program online. The receptionist, a new hire, trained under the updated onboarding, smiled genuinely and responded, "Of course. Would you like to speak with someone from the team?" There was no hesitation. The woman blinked, smiled, and nodded. "Yes, please." Upstairs, Shaq and Brielle sat in a room that didn't need prestige to feel important. They didn't talk about the past anymore. They didn't need to. The room they had been blocked from once, symbolically, procedurally, and systemically, now bore their name, and more importantly, it carried their design. There were no gold plaques, no portraits, just policy, just presence, and a sign that no one dared remove. The O'Neill Foundation wasn't about revenge. It was about redirection, not toward the past, but toward what the future could become when truth is no longer denied its space. And outside that room, across every polished floor and whispered corridor, one thing echoed louder than names. The ground had shifted. The Ashworth Grand reopened on a Monday. Not with a ribbon cutting or flashbulbs. Not with a celebrity DJ or glittering speeches. Just with open doors. There was no press advisory, no PR video loop in the lobby. The chandelier lights were lowered to a warm hum, the scent of fresh linen gently threaded the air, and the grand piano, untouched since the gala, played itself softly in the background. A handwritten sign stood on a walnut easel by the entrance, not framed, not printed, just simple lettering in dark blue ink. "Welcome to a new chapter. Walk in, be seen." Inside, the changes weren't loud, but they were everywhere. The check-in counter had been restructured. One section now sat lower, more accessible to guests in wheelchairs. The uniforms had been redesigned with input from staff, tailored not for optics but for dignity and practicality. A small plaque near the elevator, discreet but permanent, read, "Scholarship Initiative Office, Level 3, Empowering Future Leaders in Hospitality." On that third floor, two young interns, both from different corners of Chicago's West Side, sat at matching desks, reviewing logistics for an upcoming mentorship weekend. One of them had never set foot in a hotel like this before. The foundation found her. The other had once been told during a college application interview that she had leadership potential, just not the polish. Now both wore that polish on their own terms. Back downstairs, Brielle walked the main corridor in silence. No clipboard, no heels clicking like punctuation. Just a quiet presence, familiar and watchful. The hallway had once felt cold to her, not in temperature but in tone. It had mirrored the tone of those who once walked it without ever looking her in the eye. Now as she passed the front desk, a new receptionist, Mateo, barely 24, always composed, offered her a nod of respect. Not deference, respect. She returned it with the faintest smile. No one followed her. No one asked where she was going. She didn't need to be escorted through her own creation. On the mezzanine level, where once a private lounge existed for elite clientele, the room had been repurposed into a rotating gallery curated by young artists from underserved communities. Today's exhibit was titled Thresholds. One piece, a black and white photograph of an open hotel door with no one inside, caught her eye. She lingered there a moment. Not to remember the past, but to respect it. Outside, the courtyard garden had changed too. Gone were the ornamental hedges and symmetrical benches. In their place, a walking path curved gently between shade trees and wild flowers, with tables built low and wide, designed for conversation, not stature. Shaq sat at one of those tables, already holding 2 cups of coffee. He didn't stand when she approached. He didn't need to. Brielle slid into the chair across from him and wrapped her hands around the cup, feeling the warmth before taking a sip. They didn't speak for a moment, just listened. The rustle of trees, a distant laugh from the service wing, footsteps that didn't speed up when they neared. "Peace." Finally, Shaq leaned back and said, "You didn't just take it back." She looked up, brows raised slightly in question. "You lifted it higher." There was no boast in his voice, just recognition. Brielle didn't respond right away. She looked out across the garden, toward the side path that curved toward the new community entrance, the one that led to the free stay suites reserved for minority service veterans and survivors of housing discrimination. No ID required, no loyalty points, just space. "I didn't build it for applause," she said quietly. "I built it so no one has to explain why they belong." Shaq nodded once. "They'll feel it, whether they say it or not." He wasn't wrong. Already the anonymous reporting system had received several submissions. Not complaints, but thanks. Gratitude from a guest who had once been asked to wait outside for valet, even when they'd walked in through the front. From a former employee who said, "I never thought I'd want to come back, but I did." Even Preston had submitted a form. Not anonymously, not as an apology, but as an acknowledgement. The Ashworth had not destroyed its past. It had renamed it, reoriented it, and now, everything stood a little quieter, a little straighter, a little more awake. Brielle glanced back toward the building. Its shadow stretched long but soft across the garden path. "I used to think reclaiming meant standing where you were once denied," she said. "But it doesn't. It means designing the space so no one else has to stand alone in the first place." Shaq smiled, sipping his coffee. "That's legacy." She didn't nod. She didn't need to. The air didn't carry tension anymore. Only purpose. And as the sunlight shifted through the trees, lighting the side of the building that once turned its face away from people like her, a final voice carried gently across the space, not spoken aloud, but felt in the closing line of a story long denied its place. Sometimes the greatest revenge is building the table they once refused to seat you at, and letting everyone eat. You've seen what silence can hide. Now imagine what truth can build. If this story hits something real, sit with it, share it, carry it forward. The Ashworth Grand isn't fiction. It's a blueprint. Not for what was, but for what should have been all along. And maybe, for what comes next.